Angle, whether he has a view on that.
Mr Chair.
David Clark.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I think we should acknowledge right from the start that this bill is a complete waste of time. Effectively, it moves legislation from one area to another, and Parliament's time could be better spent, and especially in urgency, where we are supposed to be prioritising legislation that really makes a difference at short notice to our economy, to its settings. We've just debated a bill that's been sitting around for a long time in respect of the level of what was it? It's slipping from my mind. The covered bonds. Sorry, thank you to my colleague. And you know, legislation that was important to have in place. Eventually, it's taken the government a long time to get there. We're debating things under urgency that ought really, I guess, have been tidied up earlier on. A government, though, that seems to have its eyes off the ball. David Parker has already alluded to many other things which could make our economy more productive, that could direct money, change the relative balance between the productive and speculative sectors in order to make a more productive economy, and that would help this government's fortunes. It doesn't seem to be interested in the wider interests of the New Zealand economy, preferring instead the deals with the likes of Chorus that we see being cooked up at the moment, and Sky City, the casino deal, building a convention centre off the back of problem gambling, Rio Tinto, and actually the taxpayers getting a pretty poor deal on these deals that are being done. They don't seem to have any advantages for the taxpayer other than getting the government out of a hole when it's made commitments. This legislation, as I said, largely replicates legislation already in place. We heard from a submitter from Chapman Tripp that one point they thought was worth noting was that the capital adequacy criteria tend to be much more stringent in practice than the advertised minimum capital of 8%, due to the high risk weighting given to some asset classes, as much as 350%, and the market risk operation risk multiplier. This is somewhat at variance to the original conception around second-tier financial institutions, and may result in a shrinkage to the sector greater than is allocatively efficient. Now, in layman's terms, that is really about perverse incentives to loan heavily into the mortgage market and away from productive areas. So this bill may actually have a perverse outcome where we want those firms to actually be investing in productive assets. They may be forced to take on capital adequacy measures that hamstring them and make them less competitive in the marketplace. And so I'll be interested in the Minister and the Chair's view on that, and whether he is willing to defend it. He will have known that this bill was coming up, having looked at the order paper overnight, and no doubt will have studied the finer points of the legislation and have a view as to why the government is choosing to disadvantage credit unions, why it is making life very difficult for them, and why it is trying to push more money towards the speculative housing sector, when that is such a problem for New Zealanders. Ordinary average Kiwis cannot get into their first home. This government seems determined to make that worse. We have the LVR restrictions that have been put through by the Reserve Bank that are playing out in a strange kind of way, because while first home buyers can't get into the market, it's making it cheaper, a little bit cheaper for property speculators to get in. We see the inequalities widening, and here we have another measure that distorts the economy further. This is sadly indicative of a government that has its eye off the ball. It's not about rebalancing the economy. The Minister and the Chair can stand up and provide some technical advice as to why that incentive won't come to pass, and I think it would be embarrassing if he's not willing or able to defend that. But really, the government ought to be focused on rebalancing the economy, not on passing bills that simply shift legislation from one part of the books to another. They should be more concerned about creating jobs, supporting exporters. These are the things Labor wants to do. We know that our export economy needs to be supportive. The high exchange rate is crippling our exporters. We hear that time and time again, but the government's reluctant to put monetary policy in place that would support that. They're reluctant to undertake pro-growth tax reform, the likes of a capital gains tax that would see money go toward the productive sector and out of the speculative sector. They're reluctant to support research and development in this country, and on it goes. They won't put in universal KiwiSaver, which would also create capital depth that would address the problems that this bill is in a way setting out to fix. Those bigger solutions have been looked over in favour of tinkering, Mr Chair,
David Clark.
and that is a great disappointment. This legislation needs to strike a balance. It isn't quite doing that in the right way, and it's similar to those things we've seen in the past with the Crown Retail Deposit Guarantee Scheme, where the government takes its eye off the ball. We saw in that case a 25% increase in South Canterbury Finance's books, the risk borne by the taxpayer, and then we saw a 10 times increase in another finance company. This is a government that really doesn't have itself across the detail, but it is interested in making sure that money's handed over, taxpayer money's handed over to get the deal, to get things out of the public limelight. We've seen that with Chorus, or we're seeing that with Chorus now. We've seen it with Rio Tinto, where they handed over 30 million pieces of silver, my colleague Mr Cosgrove says, $30 million without a jobs guarantee. And the very next day they're talking about laying staff off. This is a government that's doing deals to get things off the front pages, the Sky City Casino deal. It's really not focusing on growing the economy, which is what we really need. We need more jobs for Kiwis, high-value jobs, and that will be created by having the right economic settings, not by protecting vested interests. The vested interests this government seems so determined to protect. We hope that they see the light. We hope that they apply the principles that I've outlined in the future, because on this side of the House we're interested in ordinary Kiwis, those extra people that are unemployed, much higher unemployment rate than we had in the last election when National took office. Unemployment has gone up and up. And median wages are down under this government in real terms, and that's why New Zealanders are feeling the pinch. Cost of living's gone up, but their wages haven't. The tax cuts that they put through in 2010, 40% of the value to the top 10% of earners, the bottom 20% got just 10% of the value. And that is disappointing. That is growing the gap between rich and poor. It has never been so high in New Zealand, the gap between rich and poor, as it is under this government. Inequalities have grown, and they seem happy to oversee the demise of this country.
Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Chair, I want to pick up where Dave